Hello. um, I'm Vincent Presley from Secret Records, and this is part 5 of my little series that I was doing. It's been a long time, but yeah, this is part 5 in my little series about what is the best synthesizer era. It's been several months, and it's been several months because I've been waiting for a particular synthesizer to come back that's been getting repairs. It's supposed to be right there. I think it's very important for this video, but I'm just going to start shooting. If I get it back, cool. If I don't, maybe I'll just splice in some footage from someone else on YouTube showing off that synth. So anyways, this is part 5, and we are covering 1995 to 2006. And I got to tell you, it feels so good to do this era after the last couple episodes. If you haven't been watching those, the last episode was all like your romplers and your big workstations, real ugly synths, very digital. And the episode before that was more like your sterile, boring, mid-'80s kind of analog, the dying off of analog. So those two eras have their gems, but are kind of pretty rough, especially compared to this. So after the whole like workstation era of episode 4, go check it out. I think it was the base station is the one that kind of really started changing things. They brought back analog. It wasn't even virtual analog. It's a real analog synth. So it brought back knobs and just the sound of analog. And I think that reminded everyone how cool it was. Also, music was going more in that direction again. So yeah, the base station came in and just like, there's this huge wave of virtual analog synths, which are digital, but have all like analog controls and work like an analog synth used to. So you get your filter sweeps and your hard sync and, tweaking stuff while playing, which had been dead in the previous era. And crazy wavetable synthesizers. So yeah, I'm just gonna go through some of the stuff that came out in this pretty awesome era, which I think really made synthesizers cool again. It made them fun again. It made them cool again. The days of the ponytail guy that looks like a high school teacher, VHS instruction manuals like for the Kurzweils and Sonics, like the TS12. I think I talked about this one in the last video, but I didn't own one, so I'm always buying stuff. But yeah, real funny VHS instruction manual for this. Some pretty terrible music. Great synthesizer though. But anyways, okay, so we got stuff. I wrote a bunch down. Yeah, you got Base Station and like your Chord Prophecy and Trinity came out, but then by like 96, you got the Roland JP8000. Everyone starts bringing back their old names. Like Roland brought back the JP, Jupiter 8000. It was just virtual analog synth. Yamaha brought back the CS line, which was all now virtual analog. The first one was the CS1X. People still like it out there. There's a certain group of people that like it. I personally thought it was a pretty terrible virtual analog, but at least it was something. It was still better than the previous line. And then later they had like their AN1X and CS6X or something like that. Those were better, but you got your Korg Z1, you got your Access Virus synths coming out. You had also a bunch of new brands, smaller brands, kind of doing stuff. I don't know if it's pronounced Jomox or Yomox or what, but they had like their Airbase. They did some really cool stuff. There's a Red Sound Dark Star, very cool. I think that was like a tabletop synth. You got your stuff like what was it? Oh yeah, like the Revolution and the Raven. Lots of real like techno based filter tweaking kind of synths. 1998, you got your Fizmo, which is kind of a love it or hate it synth. I love this thing. This is my second one I owned. This is the company was dying right about now, and they were like rushed to put it out, and it became something totally different. So there are some issues with it because it clearly wasn't done, but there is now a third party software to help program it, and makes this thing a fucking dream. You just So yeah, you got your wavetable Fizmo, you got your XTK, you had things like the Novation Supernova, and then Ulysses made their Andromeda synth, which is not virtual analog. It was a full-fledged polyphonic analog synthesizer. Tons of modulation stuff you could do. Just the only thing I could really compare it to is something like, like the Moog 1 or something like that. Like it was just did so much more than what I think any other like poly analog can do. And that thing is, I'd really like to buy one of those, but they're pretty steep. And the one bad thing I'll say about this era is being like 20 years old. There's a lot of like early computer technology in these synths that on a lot of them is just kind of dying off. So that one, you find those not working right all the time, and I don't know how easy they are to fix. Another example of that is the Korg MS-2000, another classic virtual analog synth. Korg bringing back the MS name, what I was talking about earlier with all the brands bringing back their classic names. Korg brought back the MS for the MS-2000, and those are all dying. I had one, I can't remember what it says when you turn it on, something about a DSP error or something like that. And if it says that, it's pretty much screwed. For years, Korg would just send you a free motherboard because that's easier than trying to fix the problem, but those are long gone. So at this point, you get that message. You're just kind of screwed, unfortunately. So that's another one. Another example of a synth that's dying and might be a bad idea to buy from this era. And another one from 2002 that I really lusted after hard for a few years was the Hartman Neutron. I'll throw a picture up. Obviously, I don't have one. Very bizarre synth with a bunch of joysticks on it. Just seemed really cool and different, but those, if you find them for sale at all, they're almost always broken. It's basically like buying a 2002 early crappy PC with a bunch of viruses on it from downloaded 2002 porn. They never work. It's really sad. I mean, it's like a $4,000 or more synthesizer, but yeah, in the year 2000, you had your Andromeda, your MS-2000. Oberheim was back with their OB12. Cool virtual analog synth. People complain it's not a real Oberheim because it's not. It's released by Viscount. It was an Italian brand that just bought the name for that one synth. Doesn't sound like an Oberheim. It sounds like a really decent virtual analog synth. It doesn't have that Oberheim sound, but it's pretty cool. It is buggy. That's another one that was never quite finished. I think I had it. I think I own that one twice as well. But it has a morph feature on it, kind of like the Polybrute, where it doesn't crossfade. It actually changes from one patch to another, morphs into it. I don't think it works on any of them. I've never heard of anyone having that synth where that feature actually works. Looks really nice though. I get tempted to buy that one again just because it's a handsome synthesizer. So yeah, you have all these cool virtual analog synths. And another huge thing is both Moog is back and Dave Smith is back. Moog came back first with his Mogerfoger pedals, and then the Moog Voyager, the mini Moog Voyager. So it was really cool to see him come back. I remember going into a music store and seeing a Voyager like brand new and like laughed at the idea of a $3,000 synthesizer. How times have changed. Dave Smith came back and his first thing was the Evolver, which first it was the mono Evolver, then he made the poly Evolver rack and keyboard, and that's what's supposed to be up there is the Poly Evolver. Really cool, just very bizarre, and to this day, just one of the most unique synthesizers. The Roland V-Synth, maybe the last interesting Roland synthesizer ever made. I'm not going to get too into that, but yeah, Roland. You should try to make a new synthesizer and not just dish out the same 4 synth engines that are just software in various shaped boxes. That would be nice. But yeah, the V-Synth was really cool. That's another one I'm tempted by all the time. And then the Ulysses, after the Andromeda came out, see, that was so expensive. And it was real analog, and they wanted to do something more affordable. And they did the Ion, which I'll be playing. It's in the other corner. Another virtual analog synth. I'd say maybe the best of them as far as like what it can do. Blush Response has a really good video on that one. So check that out as well, because what I do with it's going to be totally different than what he does. Yeah. I'll probably just, some weird drony, infinite, hit a couple keys and just, that's how my patches are. You hit keys and it just plays itself. And it, he's more of a knob tweaking beat guy, but it's always really interesting and cool to watch his videos. So check that out as well. But yeah, the thing with the Ion is, again, with going back to this iffy 20-year-old tech, is they're plagued with ghost edits, people call it. I don't know if it's bad encoders or like the firmware, or basically they all seem to do this to varying degrees, but you'll be, playing or doing something, and then all of a sudden a different menu pops up, like your filter. So you have to be careful because you think you're tweaking something, and then all of a sudden it switches to another menu and you could change the parameter on something else. Sometimes updating the firmware helps. This is my third Ion, and it had the first firmware on it, and it was real buggy. And I did manage to finally get it to take the new firmware through MIDI aux. Now it seems better, but it still does it. Also, the knobs look really stupid. They look like they look like gumdrops or something. I can't think of what they're called. Some old movie theater 1960s big gummy candy. That's what the knobs look like. The Microkorg, probably the best-selling synthesizer of all time. That came out in 2002 as well. Same year as the Neutron and the Mono Evolver and the Moog Voyager. It's a pretty awesome year there. You got all your Electro Tribes, which some are really cheesy, like the EA1, super cheesy little virtual analog synth thing. But it's a kind of cool drum machine. I had this back when it came out, and I made a couple albums on it. With it, like during my Logan 5 years. And then it just kind of, the presets are so painful. That's what this era, every synth and drum machine you buy, it's just going to be like super cheesy, house rave party, not in a good way, in a, like, your dad with the ponytail that did the manual for the old Sonics is now pretending to be a raver, like is programming the presets, that sort of thing. So yeah, so I had it, made my own stuff, thought it was like a laughable drum machine, sold it. That was the Mark I, which is kind of uglier and plastic. Then this is the Mark II. It's got a better build. Also has weird bugs. This line gets real glitchy, and there's a weird thing. I think you put like a sheet of like what's it, like a rice paper, or like, like baking that you use for like baking. I can't think of what it's called right now, but like if you stick it between the panel and like the circuit board, it fixes it. It's something like that. I had to do it on like the sampler from this series, and it actually worked. This one's fine though. But I mean, it's one of the drum machines I keep around now because it's actually really unique. Because yeah, it's like virtual analog. It works like an analog drum machine. You tweak every sound. You could tweak stuff in real time. But it's also super digital, super early 2000s digital. And I think it makes for a very unique sound. So here we go. This era is so good compared to the last two. Wavetables, virtual analog, tons of knobs. The old designers are back. Tons of new, smaller brands coming out. Lots of good stuff. And so let's listen to some.